how in the world was it possible that something in there was big enough to devour a boat? From that point forward, I didn't want to go anywhere near it. I could just as well forget about anything I experienced on the school trip because all I could hear was that damn Jaws music every time I thought of the beach. A few months later, my uncles dragged me back, and let me tell you, it was not pretty. I kicked and screamed all the way from the car to the sand. I wouldn't look at the water, let alone put my toe in it. For some reason, though, I think destiny had already decided to get me back on track and in the ocean. The first sign was an incident at my elementary school. Kids showed up with a BB gun and shot up some classrooms. A few students were injured, and thankfully, since it was only a BB gun, nobody died. After the shooting, my parents felt it was time to move to Torrance. Talk about night and day. All new friends, all white too. Why no brown kids? I was too young to understand. But in Torrance, I could play outside even after it got dark. On the first day of school, I made friends with a few of the kids who were plotting how they were going to talk their parents into hitting the local surf shop to buy surfboards and wetsuits because they were going to learn to surf. They asked if I was in. Yeah, I said, not knowing what surfing was. Over the course of a few weeks, I learned what it was, and that surfing involved being in the ocean. That didn't go down too well with me, but when you're in the 6th grade, there's no way around saying you're scared of anything. That sticks with you. And I didn't want to be branded chicken vipe for life. I hoped that everyone would forget about surfing and move on, but that day never came. And soon we headed to the beach for our first surf session. We barely knew how to swim, let alone surf. How our parents didn't get jailed for dropping off minors at the beach during the biggest El Nino storm of the season, I will never know. We made our way down to the water, not knowing what to do, but paddling out anyway. We got worked. I'm really surprised that none of us drowned. The waves were huge and the water was bitter cold. But we all came out with smiles, laughs, and seawater blowing out of our noses. It was a done deal. We couldn't wait to get back in the ocean. Every day we drew waves on our notebooks, dreaming of perfect surf. For more than 35 years, the ocean has played a major role in shaping my career and family. I went to a college at Point Loma because it had a great surf break right in front of the dorms. After graduating, I bought a surf shop. Over the years, I got to work with some of the biggest brands in the world. And through my work on the boards of Surfrider, Lonely Whale, Ocean Champions, and 5 Gyres, I discovered just how fragile our ocean really is. I learned that we can never take anything for granted when it comes to the health of our ocean. Because as we've seen time and time again, there are those that don't understand the power of our ocean and why we have to protect it. Now, I'm just one example of how a chance encounter with the ocean can have a major impact in shifting that comprehension. My thoughts for you: if we want to win this fight, we need to bring those farthest from the ocean closer to it. Thank you.
It was a sunny, cloudless day in Ocean Beach, San Diego. My 12-year-old son, Austin, and I were participating in a Surfrider Foundation beach cleanup. He was in middle school and he needed to complete a minimum amount of community service hours. As we picked up trash off our beach that morning, at one point he looked up at me and he said, "We should do more of this. This is a lot of fun." In that very matter-of-fact way, I looked out at the vast ocean and I thought to myself, I've been sitting on the sidelines of life. I had this revelation that I've been sitting on the sidelines of my life, no balance, working 60 hours a week, no activism. I would tell you what you were doing right or what you were doing wrong. And I was ultimately failing to live my life purpose. After a brief few minutes, I looked back at my son in his eyes and I replied, "Austin, you're right. We need to do a lot more of this." That moment and experience with my son alongside the beautiful blue ocean, cleaning the beach, changed the course of our lives. I made the decision that day to change my priorities and become the best example of a father, a man, and a human being that I could be for my son. So, I unexpectedly became a father. I met Austin when he was 5 years old. He and his mom had recently relocated from Detroit to San Diego. But by the time he was 6, his mom and I were a couple, and the three of us were a family living together. The next 6 years as a family unit, but ultimately his mom and I grew apart, and when he was 12, our family split apart. She was unable to raise Austin on her own, so like anyone should, I stepped up and I raised my son. During those 6 years, by societal standards, I was a success. I owned and operated a business, I owned a home, I had a family, and I had more money than I knew how to spend. However, this type of success came at a very heavy price. I had no balance, and I was prioritizing the almighty dollar over everything in my life. I lacked self-care, and I was emotionally, spiritually, and physically unfit. I surely wasn't the best example of a father, a man, and a human being for my son. But you see, I was born an activist. It's innate in me. I believe it's who I am. I've advocated for our environment, human rights, and social justice issues for as long as I can remember. I've worked within the system, and I've worked from the outside to create positive change and fulfill my purpose to actively and intentionally change this world, help make this world a better place, impact people's lives, and inspire others to do the same. However, at 32 years old, on the beach that day with my son Austin, I found myself in a huge hiatus and living my life purpose. However, that moment, that experience with my son, ultimately gifted me freedom and got me back on track. Part of that, I was reintroduced to the ocean. You see, I've had a strong affection for the ocean since I was a little boy growing up with 4 siblings vacationing in the Outer Banks in North Carolina. However, it had been years at 32 years old since I had set foot in the ocean. So I started surfing again with Austin. We got certified to scuba dive together and started to scuba together. We started to open water swim together. And naturally, I fell in love with the ocean as I never had before. And as a result, I found a new avenue to live my life purpose, to protect what we love, our ocean, inspire those around me to do the same, and most importantly, to set an example for my son. And so for the last 10 years, I've dedicated countless time and energy to do exactly that. Through education, through awareness, and impacting policy, Myself and many others around me have helped to mitigate plastic pollution in our oceans. About a week ago, my son called me after we spent a weekend together in Mammoth. And he called me to tell me how grateful he was that I was his father. He called me to thank me for raising him and for setting an example of a loving father and how to be a leader in your community. As a father, it melted my heart and streams of tears rolled down my cheeks. My son will be graduating from UC Santa Cruz in June, so naturally he's pondering his post-college life. I received a message about 3 weeks ago from a family-like friend who recently was at dinner with Austin in Santa Cruz, and my friend told me, Austin is such a fine young man. Do you know what he told me? He just told me, Stephen, I think I can really make a difference in this world. I really think I can help other people's lives. That sunny, cloudless Saturday morning in Ocean Beach at the beach cleanup changed everything. And my primary purpose, to be the best father that I can be.
I did not choose to have breast cancer, but then again, nobody does. I eat organic, I exercise every day, I teach scuba diving for a living, and have a relatively stress-free life. Why me? However, I am choosing how I go through the journey. 2016 was a horrible year. My grandmother died of old age. My mother died of breast cancer. My first cousin died of breast cancer at age 39. Then my diagnosis. I was 39. Maybe it comes from spending most of my life underwater, but I choose to look at the bright side of things. My grandma was 97. She had a beautiful life. My mom was 67. She saw my sister and I grow up. She was with me when my son was born 4 years ago. And she was gifted with a granddaughter from my sister just before she passed away. Fortunately, the doctors detected my cancer early. I didn't feel any signs, such as a lump. The only reason I went for a mammogram was because when my mother was diagnosed the previous year, I was told to go get checked. That year, it was all good. The following, after my routine checkup, they called me back for an ultrasound. The biopsy was the day before I flew to my hometown of Budapest to see my mother one last time. She was losing her battle with cancer. In 1 year, it had spread to her lymph nodes, her liver, and pretty much her entire body, despite all the treatments the doctors tried. I called my doctor for my biopsy result as soon as we landed. She had promised to give them to me over the phone, even though this is not how they normally do things. But given my circumstances, she made an exception. On that phone call, thousands of miles away from my American home, the family and community that I had built over the past 10 years, I learned that I have breast cancer. After the initial shock, I needed to come up with a game plan. First, I had to fly back to Los Angeles and meet my doctors, because my experience with my mother and cousin taught me that time is of the essence. As soon as I was back in LA, I headed to meet my oncologist. He had bad news and good news. I already know I have cancer, so give me the good news. I said. Luckily, my cancer would respond to hormone therapy, unlike my mother's. I decided on a double mastectomy. Chemotherapy was not fun at all. One of the things that hit me the hardest during this whole journey was the losing of my hair. I decided to be bold and bald, because you can't really scuba dive in a wig. But most importantly, I did not want to pretend that everything was normal. Over the next few months, I had good days and bad days. At first, when I was quite weak, the closest I could get to the ocean was short walks at the beach. Just listening to the sound of the waves was healing. When I felt better, between treatments, I went swimming. As I got stronger, I yearned for scuba diving. I just wanted to breathe underwater and hover weightless, watching the simple life of sea creatures. Scuba diving is my Shangri-La, my happy place, and my passion. I was 13 years old when I started competing in a sport called orienteering diving, which takes place in lakes with almost zero visibility. The sport was sponsored by the Hungarian military, and the object is to find predetermined destination using a compass, a map, and a distance accounting device. I trained 5 times a week and spent every weekend and summer camping by the lakes and rivers of Hungary. I logged more than 500 dives before I ever saw the sea. Hungary was a communist country, and we were not allowed to travel anywhere except to Mother Russia, so I never saw the ocean as a child. After the Berlin Wall fell, our dive club went to Corfu in Greece. That was the first time I touched salt water. We dropped down into a breathtaking, crystal clear bay and swam with sharks, turtles, and octopus. When I surfaced, I knew that I wanted to be a dive instructor. I decided then that I would live in a place where there are palm trees, sunshine, and an ocean to dive in, and no winter. Most people considered scuba diving as a hobby. My friends and family were skeptical when I told them I was going to make a living doing what I loved. Every time they told me that I couldn't do it, I just looked into their eyes and said, "You just watch me." Having cancer only reinforced my belief that life is too short to listen to people telling you what you cannot or should not do. A week after my last chemo, I organized a trip to Catalina Island to celebrate Paddy Women Dive Day with 20 other female divers. After spending the day in the kelp forest, we talked about our favorite experiences underwater and how the sport empowered us. They had so many questions about my experience. It was my first step in leading by example, reminding other women that if I can survive and thrive, they can too. I feel like a phoenix, that mythical sacred firebird who regenerates when hurt. After 2 years of treatments and surgeries, I am my old self. While I do have to take pills my doctor prescribes for another couple of years to minimize the chance of cancer reoccurring, the medicine that worked best for me was the ocean. Living in a technology-driven, fast-paced world, I find the quiet moments in the ocean healing my soul one breath at a time. As time passes and my breath slows down, my muscle relax, slowing my body and my thoughts. Underwater, I always seem to achieve that meditative state of mind where I can clear my brain from disruptive thoughts and just be in that very moment. Underwater is the only place in the world outside of space where I can experience weightlessness and the freedom to move in any direction I choose. This feeling is empowering and reinforces that we are all in charge of our lives and can choose from many courses to follow. Emerging I am recharged and reborn. I could feel sorry for myself and my family for what we had to go through, but I choose to feel grateful for this gift of healing.
Well, hello, Five Gyres. Some great stories tonight, huh? You know, the only thing I like more than open water swimming is actually talking about open water swimming. So this is why tonight's perfect. You know, tonight I want to tell you the story about a fish that existed 375 million years ago. Imagine like an oversized, warped salamander crawling around the alluvial marshlands. It's looking for food, and over the years, the fins become little arms, and the tail separates to become legs. And maybe most importantly, the gills become lungs. And pretty soon, this fish can stand, and it never looked back. So not long ago, Dr. Neil Shubin and some paleontologists discovered this fossil, and they named it Tiktaalik. So Tiktaalik tells us a lot about who we are as humans, about our DNA and our physiology. It should, because it's our oldest ancestor. And so when I learned about Tiktaalik, it really sparked something in me and taught me a lot about myself and my attraction to water. See, I was the first person to swim across Lake Pontchartrain for 25 miles a couple of years ago. It took 15 hours. And I swam to raise awareness and funding for the Lake Pontchartrain Basin Foundation, who had been working, coincidentally, for 25 years to clean up the lake. Now, let me just set the scene real quick, all right? It's sunrise and the full moon is setting. We've got a giant merman on top of a party barge that's from Mardi Gras shooting out lasers into the night sky. David Amram, the legendary jazz musician, is playing the longest jazz gig of his life at 84 years old for 14 hours. He's going to be joined by Papa Mali and Uganda Roberts. And there was this sublime moment where time seemed to really stand still. And I felt this connection to the water. That, you know, I wasn't a spectator anymore here. I was a participant. And I belonged here. I had a right to be here, even if it was with alligators and bull sharks. You know, I had worked for several years for the author Hunter S. Thompson, and he had called it gonzo swimming because of the way that we put together art and music and athletics, but most importantly, activism. And you know, some people thought I was crazy for swimming in Lake Pontchartrain because it was so polluted. And you know, my mom was proud of me for being on the front cover of the Times-Picayune. She just didn't know it would be in something a little bit larger than a Speedo. So then I took that inner fish and I went down to Canyonlands near Moab, and I swam 47 miles on the Colorado River. And I had teamed up with American Rivers. We had done a lot of work together in the past, but they had just designated the Colorado River as the most endangered river in America. And that's why I kept swimming. And then just recently, this past summer, with Carolyn Box from Five Gyres on board testing for plastics, we did the first ever swim from the Virgin Islands to Puerto Rico. So thank you, Carolyn. And she was, yeah. She was doing testing while I was swimming through the night. And, you know, when I start these swims and I'm in these swims, I think about Tiktaalik and I think about the fish that's somewhere deep inside me. But what I really think about and what keeps me going is the work that these organizations do every day to protect our planet's most precious resource. You know, we swam for the Scuba Dog Society, who protect coral reefs. I'm on the board of the Inland Ocean Coalition in Boulder, Colorado. We're saving the oceans from a mile high. You don't just have to live on the coast to care about the oceans. And then, of course, the great work that Five Gyres does. And you know, when you do these swims, it becomes something really greater than the sum of its parts. It's much more than just swimming. It's really about being a participant, and not just in the water, but in life. Because you know what? The oceans need all of you. They need us. And we are the perfect ambassadors for water. And that's why events like tonight are so important. And so, you know, maybe it wasn't so crazy after all with these swims. Because neuroscientists like John Nichols have discovered that water actually makes us smarter. It makes us saner, calmer, makes us better. I'm not even going to ask here, who likes sitting by water? Everybody. So there's a kernel of Tiktaalik in all of us. It's part of our DNA. It's who we are. And so the next time that you're in the water, raise a glass. Say hello to your inner fish. Yeah, because it just might feel like home. So thank you very much. All right.
It's with much trepidation that Bryce, a former US Army Ranger, and myself slip into the dark, muddy waters a few miles offshore. The oxygen rebreathers we're using can be unforgiving. Diving in excess of 30 feet quickly leads to oxygen narcosis and death. Navigating underwater at night by compass only and with 6 inches of visibility challenges even the most experienced of Navy SEALs. And to top it off, massive crocodiles lurk in the mangroves nearby. What can possibly go wrong? 90 minutes later, we silently glide under the docks of Punta Arenas in Costa Rica. We surface and hide our DPVs and our military rebreathers, then swim slowly among suspected illegal shark finning vessels, being careful to remain hidden. Eventually, I climb onto one, and I place a satellite tracker on top of its masthead. We climb onto a second vessel and do the same. Dogs, sensing our presence, start barking incessantly, and the appearance of 2 armed guards on the dock sees Bryce and I beating a hasty retreat back into the safety of those dark, muddy waters. The mission was a success, but we had no idea of the crazy journey we were about to embark upon. The 2 vessels we now tracked were part of a much larger shark finning operation. Suspecting shark finning is one thing, but proving in a court of law quite another. Our hope was that by tracking them, we could learn when and where they were shark finning, catch them in the act, and then prosecute them. Both vessels soon leave port, but much to our surprise, they slide along the coastline. Much to our surprise, instead of sliding along the coastline where shark finning would normally occur, they head directly offshore. We start to think our intelligence is wrong. 3 days later, we get the answer as both longliners descend on the Cocos Island Marine Reserve. Featured in the original Jurassic Park and described as Jacques Cousteau as the most beautiful islands in the world, Cocos is the crown jewel amongst Costa Rica's marine protected areas. Sadly, it's also under increasing threat by shark finners, and it would seem our 2 tracked vessels were part of this pillaging. We link up with a government unit and hatch a somewhat foolhardy plan to take our tiny little 25-foot sea legs amphib 300 nautical miles offshore to go and bust these shark finners. Our tiny vessel has limited fuel capacity, so we drag behind us a towable fuel bladder with gasoline sloshing inside it. The first half of the voyage is painless. Blue skies, flat seas, gentle breeze, crew is all happy, then things start going pear-shaped. Our military-grade fuel bladder leaks much of its precious cargo, leaving us with insufficient fuel to make it back to the mainland. We can maybe make it as far as Cocos Island, but there's now a serious question mark over water contamination. We continue on, and then one of the engines dies. We drop to a single motor, but that then too starts to fail from contaminated fuel. Our speed drops to a crawl in a last-ditch effort to preserve our struggling motor. As darkness descends, a front comes hurtling in, and massive waves come crashing over our bow and spilling into our tiny boat. Seasick men lie vomiting on the floor, and our very survival hangs in the balance. The bilge pump is running constantly, and its failure would see us flooded and sunk. Constant spray renders our night vision goggles useless, making it impossible to navigate around these dangerous breaking waves. Our only option is to continue blindly into these angry seas, hoping our engine holds out, our fuel holds out, our bilge pump holds out, and no massive wave swamps us. In Māori legend, Tangaroa is the god of the sea. Sometimes he's generous to us. He provides us with food, he entertains us, he mesmerises us with majesty and beauty. But sometimes he teaches us a lesson. In taking our little boat and fuel bladder so far offshore, we had disrespected Tangaroa, and in return, he gives us a hiding. The following day, and crawling along at 3 knots, 5 broken men arrived on Cocos Island. Our proposed voyage of 24 hours had morphed into a 72-hour nightmare, but we were alive and we were extremely grateful for it. I'd like to think we've subsequently redeemed ourselves with Tangaroa. A few days later, and we caught 7 boats shark finning illegally inside the Cocos Island Marine Protected Area. And in recent years, our team has caught and prosecuted countless boats fishing illegally. I'm not sure that Tangaroa has completely forgiven me yet, but these days I do treat him with a lot more respect. Thank you.
Never turn your back on the ocean, said Junior, the paunchy, silver-haired surf instructor who, between puffs of his cigarette and sips of brown-bagged beer, ushered my brother Kevin and me into the water. It was the summer of 1977. We were on a week-long Pleasant Hawaiian Holidays package deal, 5 days on Oahu, 2 days on the Big Island, 2 days on Kauai. From the balcony of our 9th floor hotel room on Oahu, we could see, off to the left, Diamond Head, majestic and ancient, and to the right, Alawai Yacht Harbor and Magic Island. That's where they filmed the opening to Gilligan's Island, said Kevin. Out front, the ocean was a sparkling turquoise playground. Ships, sailboats, catamarans, parasails, and glass-bottom boats occupied the upper third of our panoramic view. In the foreground, outrigger canoes, boogie boarders, rafters, and surfers dotted the reefs. When a swell came, it swept across this 2-mile stretch. All at once, wave riders, prone, sitting, standing, barreled shoreward. One morning, Dad gave us a few bucks, told Kevin to look after me, and sent us on our way. Between racks of banana yellow softboards, perched on a milk crate, we found Junior. He wore black trunks and a white tank top. His thick pidgin was hard to understand, but the casual way he picked out our boards, attached leashes with one hand, and shrugged off our nervous questions evoked trust. He ran us through a few do's and don'ts. Do keep your eyes open underwater. Don't bail your board ever. Lying prone on one of the boards, cigarette glued to lower lip, he showed us how to stand. Not here, he said, gripping the rails, but right here. With hands at the center of the board, thumbs almost touching, he popped to his feet and stood lithely, a 15-year-old trapped in a 50-year-old body. Easy, he said. As Kevin and I attempted to follow suit, Junior looked seaward. A lot of story here, he said. Later, I would learn that Waikiki is the spot where the great Duke Kahanamoku got a mile-long ride in 1917, where Jimmy Stewart, Gary Cooper, Montgomery Clift, and Babe Ruth caught their first waves in the 50s, and where the Beach Boy ethos, part surf instructor, part entertainer, part gigolo, originated. One story has a strapping beach boy and a smitten Howley girl making love while riding a wave under the full moon. But we didn't know any of this yet. We only knew that our cousin Jeff had recently wallpapered his bedroom in surf photos and raved fanatically about hang fives and tube rides. Kevin and I dragged the boards to the shoreline, climbed on, and paddled. The water was bathtub warm, the sky a mesmerizing blue. When we reached the impact zone, we got bashed around, the surge of whitewash ripping our boards out from under us. Junior's advice, meet the waves at a 90-degree angle, seemed so easy from shore. The wave riders in the lineup were a motley bunch. A young Japanese girl, maybe 7, death gripped her sumo-looking father's shoulders as he attempted to straddle his foundering longboard. A red-headed teenager, pinker than he was white, clutched a raft. An outrigger canoe carrying a dozen grandmas and grandpas in leis and straw hats stroked toward Diamond Head. Barrel-chested Hawaiians picked off even the slightest hint of a wave, dancing up and down on their boards, arms casually at their sides. Our first attempts were discouraging. Stroke for the looming swell too early and it passes right by. Too late and you're tossed head over heels. When we did finally catch a wave, it careened so fast, bouncing blinding spray in the face, that crawling to your feet was nearly impossible. There were a few little teases. Kevin got up, glided for a while in a style identical to his skateboarding, then caught an edge and fell. I got a tiny moment where I was up and something swirled in my belly, and then I slipped backward and nearly sprained my knee on the board. That night we were badly sunburned and nipple rashed, the latter of which killed even after Mom slathered us in aloe vera lotion. In our hotel lobby, I bought a booklet entitled How to Surf in Hawaii, which essentially repeated what Junior had told us, but in more technical terms. In the back of it, reprinted probably without permission, was a royal sport, Jack London's essay about his introduction to surfing at Waikiki in 1911. This was the article that surf historians cite as the seed that helped spread surfing across the USA. But again, I didn't know this yet. Before bed, Kevin and I in our sleeping bags, Dad read aloud. Where but the moment before was only the wide desolation and invincible roar is now a man erect, full-statured, flying through the air, flying forward, flying fast as the surge on which he stands. He is a Mercury, a brown Mercury. His heels are winged, and in them is the swiftness of the sea. The following morning, we hit it again, a 6-hour session in which our wave quota increased, and as a result, our cumulative seconds standing up. The day after that, same thing. Lots of hours in the water, more confidence, more flickering victories. Once on our feet, it was not unlike skateboarding. In fact, all the years of bending and weaving down sidewalks was the perfect dress rehearsal. It was reading the water that was the hard part. It was having no edges, nothing solid to grab onto. Laying in bed that night, sweet sea breeze ruffling the curtains, it all returned. The thrill of stroking, 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 then suddenly being raised up as if by some divine hand. The precarious climb from prone to feet. The giddy buzz of standing tall in a Bruce Lee fighter stance as the whitewash tickled my heels and the sapphire blue whooshed past. It felt as if I was under a spell, as if salt water had entered my veins. Thank you.
The river provides, she says. I look up to see a saffron-clad sadhvi, a holy woman. She says she too is headed for the ocean. She's walking there. I notice that she is barefoot, and all she has is the clothes on her back. So rather sheepishly, I strap the last of my ultra-modern, ultralight gear on my board and think about the 3,000 or so kilometers I still had to paddle to get to the ocean. The river is no place for a woman, they all told me. Even if I had survived the polluted waters, the crocodiles, the fog, the sand mafia, I could be raped, kidnapped, murdered, or if I was super lucky, all three. My folks were so worried that they suggested that I just do the whitewater section, which is in the upper Himalayas, 50 times over. That's about like 3,000 kilometers. If only they knew how many tumble dries I took in the rapids that were in the upper Ganges. The river will protect you, said the sadhvi. She repeats, the river provides, almost as if she's reading my mind. She says, just don't let its physical form corrupt its essence. I think about this often as I paddle across barren floodplains, past the oldest living city in the world, across hundreds of dolphins, 867 of them, I counted each one. Across countless funeral pyres, and as I tried really hard to answer the questions of thousands and thousands of kind, generous, curious faces that called this river their home. There's not a single day when I don't struggle with this idea of this beauty, but also the contrast in the sacred and the profane. This constant coexistence of life and death. And this bizarre fact that while this is my adventure, this is daily life for 500 million people. To me, the new purpose of adventure is not to satisfy our egos, is not to conquer, not to really talk about exploring this world, besides the deep oceans, but it's really to think about and how we can highlight the beauty and the fragility of this earth, of humankind. I'm almost 2,000 kilometers in at this point, and I smell the city before I see it. It feels a little bit like ammonia. The water here feels heavy. It feels still. It feels really dead. The barrage before city limits has barricaded the river in, and seemingly life itself. The dirty brown of the Ganges here is a dense, frothy white. I spot a few dogs tearing at what looks like the remains of a dead body. Unfortunately, not the first time I would see one. A little further downstream, I spot a bunch of kids playing cricket on the banks. The bank itself is covered almost entirely in plastic. It's a little otherworldly. And if the whole scene isn't Mad Max enough, on my right is the architect of this rather pleasant scenery. There's a ginormous pipe spewing an entire city's worth of raw, untreated sewage into the river right where I'm paddling. I think really hard to myself, I can't fall in here. I tell myself, man, that would really suck. Subconsciously, I reach out to this little figure of Lord Ganesha that I always carry in my flotation jacket. And you know how these things go. Barely a moment later, I feel my fin getting caught in something. Simultaneously, the nose of my board hits what feels like a sandbar. And before I know it, I'm submerged in 20 million people worth of shit. I mean, that's a lot of shit. And there's no way I can tell you what that feels like. It's not as something to compare it to. It just feels a little bit ill-advised and, as they say in England, just a little bit unpleasant. So now here I am, submerged in shit. So instead of overturning my board, and now let me just tell you that my board was heavy. It had about 70 pounds of gear on it. So instead of doing that and getting back on my feet, I'm starting to think, oh my God, I really wish my GoPro was on right now because this footage will be so sick. Why didn't I get a drone? Like, does drinking soda kill Ganges germs? Does my insurance cover shitty rescues? I mean, you know, just the normal stuff when you're submerged in shit. So at this point, I'm so distracted that I kind of forget. I mean, the river's not really flowing here, but there's still a current. And I'm so distracted that I suddenly notice that I'm meters away from that ginormous waterfall, the pipe of shit. And I mean, that footage would have been amazing, but no. I first tasted the Ganges the day I was born. My grandmother blessed me with Ganges water. It's called Ganga Jal. So I'm thinking, what doesn't kill you probably makes you stronger. And this is when I remember the crocodiles. And I have a freak out, and I'm like, oh my God, gotta get back on my board. And when I'm trying to do this unsuccessfully, I hear someone say, Didi, sister. And then I spot these two kids, no more than 5 to 6 years old, and they're paddling frantically towards me in what is definitely the smallest tin boat in the world. They ask if I'm okay, but not before they'll disapprovingly look at my ultra high spec, beautiful stand-up paddleboard. They're like, that doesn't look like a good craft of choice. One of them grabs me by my flotation jacket, and after what seems like hours, I feel solid ground below me. And oddly enough, I feel pretty intact besides that small matter of feeling quite shitty. It's a small village on the river, what they call an illegal settlement. These people don't exist on paper. They're invisible. They don't have any rights. They don't have any water. They have no sanitation. And as I come out of the water, I'm immediately surrounded by 100 faces and what I suspect fairly amused eyes. I mean, it's not every day you get someone to do a Baywatch-style entrance into your river covered in shit. I'm bombarded by a million questions and also offered some tea. As I thank the kids profusely, I hear someone say, "Have you ever seen a woman in half pant?" I mean, they meant shorts, and they were talking about me. Rather helpfully, I only now find out that there indeed are crocodiles in that water. The village elder tells me that the water I've just come out of is what they use for everything, including drinking. Goddess Ganga is their lifeline, he says. But don't you think this water is dirty, that is dangerous? I ask him. What do you think? He asks me, really gently. I remember the Sadhvi, the holy woman, and almost instinctively I say, the river provides. Thank you.
Did you not eat enough at the reception?
I can't help it. I just love these fries. Anyone here ever been to that fast food chain from the East Coast, the Five Guys? Every time I see their name, I'm reminded of getting a letter from the IRS 10 years ago when we were first getting started. And I thought, uh-oh, what have we done wrong? But it turned out to be a letter congratulating us on the establishment of our new nonprofit organization, the Five Guys Institute. True story.
And a lot happens in 10 years. You know, I think back to our first expedition. Back in 2010, we sailed from Bermuda over to the Azores across North Atlantic in January. We learned then not to ever do that again. There was a massive hurricane overtook us and 40-foot waves. It was pretty amazing. But we began to build our crew, our colleagues. People like Leslie Moyer and Steve Wilson and Carolyn Box joined our team, and our team began to expand. And 5 years later, we found ourselves with 15 expeditions behind us. Over 200 people had sailed with us, people we call our friends still today. And we had sailed through all 5 subtropical gyres. And then we published our work. We published the first estimate of all plastics in all oceans, from 5.25 trillion particles of plastic weighing 250,000 tons. At that point, we knew a lot about plastic in the middle of nowhere.
But we realized that countries and companies were slow to change, because what we found in the middle of the oceans was the ultimate tragedy of the commons. You can't trace ocean plastics back to a single source. And these countries didn't want to take responsibility. What you can do, though, is go to the Great Lakes. And what we found in the Great Lakes was plastic microbeads. We finally had the science to prove the source of the problem. And we were able to leverage this science to drive change, ultimately ending in a national bill to ban the sale of plastic microbeads. And this bill, this bill inspired other countries around the world to follow suit. Now, this victory really solidified for us our firm belief in the power of science to drive upstream solutions. And it also inspired our North Star goal for the next 10 years, stopping the flow of plastic pollution from source to sea by 2028. Are you with us? We face much bigger challenges ahead of us, though, as the plastics industry is now investing $180 billion in ramping up production of plastic by 40% in the next 10 years. But every single day, this movement is getting stronger. At Five Gyres, we now have 470 ambassadors, some right here in this room, in 53 countries around the world, stopping plastic pollution in their own communities. And now with our partners at the Break Free from Plastic movement, we're forging new alliances with new voices in environmental justice, in toxics, climate. And we're united here against a common goal: the just transition from fossil fuels.
So the movement has arrived. It's here. And we look back on our 10 years and think, what's next for Five Gyres? We're going upstream. We're launching expeditions along coastlines, looking at trash on beaches, going up rivers to the streets, helping cities to understand what is their plastic footprint, to stop that loss of trash from land to sea, pushing this movement to build zero-waste cities around the world. What we don't want to see anymore, and we've seen this before in our expeditions, children living and scavenging in landfills with their families, or animals choking on plastic bags, straws coming out of turtles' noses. Those things, I mean, they make you angry and they tear your heart out. We can stop this. This movement is growing, and it's all of us. It's all of you here tonight. It's millions of people worldwide that we want to see a better future, but not just to see it. We're doing it. We're making it happen.
We are so inspired by every single one of you in the room because you are truly making the change. And especially by our small and dedicated team. I'd love to ask our Five Gyres staff and our board, present and past, to please stand up for a moment. And our executive director, who's behind the stage, Rachel Sarnoff, as well. And also to our sponsors, the companies and individuals who made tonight happen. You are really fueling this movement. A lot happens in 10 years. And with your support, we're hoping for 10 more. 10 more to march together towards a planet free of plastic pollution. Thank you.